All right. After that phone call, part two. To prove the point, he turned to move again. I, however, unable to quell my excited curiosity, managed to slip in one more question. Mr. Grummage, sir, what is the captain's name? Mr. Grummage stopped again, frowning in an irritated fashion, but all the same consulted his paper. Captain Jaggery, he announced, and once more turned to go. Here! The porter exclaimed. Remember, he's the guy who's carrying her trunk. He had come up close and overheard our talk. Both Mr. Grummage and I looked about. Did you say Captain Jaggery? The porter demanded. Are you addressing me? Mr. Grummage inquired, making it perfectly clear that if so, the porter had committed a serious breach of decorum. So, Porter is a worker. This guy is a rich dude. And so he's like, hold on. Are you, this lowly worker porter guy, talking to me, a rich businessman? What do you think you're doing? You're not supposed to be talking to me. I was, the man said, talking over my head. And I'm asking if I heard right when you said you were going to a ship mastered by a certain Captain Jaggery. He spoke the name Jaggery as if it were something positively loathsome. I was not addressing you, Mr. Grummage informed the man. But I hears you all the same, the porter went on, and so saying he swung my trunk down upon the dock with such a ferocious crack that I feared it would snap in two. I don't intend to take one more step toward anything to do with a Mr. Jaggery. Not for double gold, not one more step. See here, Mr. Grummage cried, with indignation. You undertook. Never mind what I undertook, the man retorted. It's worth more to me to avoid that man than to close with your coin. Without other word, he marched off. So he hears who the captain is, like, psh, I'm not going near that dude. Throws the trunk down and walks off. Stop! I say stop, Mr. Grummage called. It was in vain. The porter had gone, and quickly at that. Mr. Grummage and I looked at each other. I hardly knew what to make of it, nor clearly did he. Yet he did what he had to do. He surveyed the area in search of a replacement. There, you man, he cried to the first, who passed by, a huge laboring fellow in a smock. Here's a shilling if you can carry this young lady's trunk. The man paused, looked at Mr. Grummage, at me, at the trunk. That? He asked disdainfully. I'll be happy to add a second shilling, I volunteered, thinking that a low offer was the problem. Miss Doyle, Mr. Grummage snapped. Let me handle this. Two shillings, the workman said quickly. One, Mr. Grummage countered. Two, the workman repeated and held his hand out. To Mr. Grummage, who gave him but one coin. Then the man turned and extended his hand to me. Hastily, I began to extract a coin from my reticule, which is basically her purse. Miss Doyle, Mr. Grummage objected. I did promise, I whispered and dropped the coin into the man's upturned palm. Right you are, miss, said the porter with a tip of his hat. May the whole world follow in your fashion. This commendation of my principles of moral goodness brought a blush of pleasure that I could hardly suppress. As for Mr. Grummage, he made a point of clearing his throat to indicate disapproval. Now then, the porter asked, where does the young lady require this? Never mind where, Mr. Grummage snapped. Along the docks here, I'll tell you when we arrive. The man pocketed, the money pocketed, the man lumbered over to my trunk, swung it to his shoulder, and with astonishing ease, considering the trunk's weight and size, and said, lead on. Mr. Grummage, wasting no more time, and perhaps fearful of consequence of more talk, started off again. After guiding us through a maze of docks and quays, he came to a stop. With a half-turn, he announced, there she sits, and gestured to a ship moored to the slip before us. I had hardly looked where he pointed when I heard a thump behind. Startled, I turned and saw that the new man, the one we just engaged, had taken one look at the Seahawk, set down my trunk in haste, and like the first, run off without any word of explanation at all. So, first guy, here's the name Captain Jaggery, throws the trunk down. I'm not going near that. Second guy here sees the Seahawk, is like, psh, I'm not going near that ship, throws the trunk down, runs off. So right now in the second box, I want you to write down, what would you be thinking at this moment? Okay, I'm going to pause the video here in a second. What would you be thinking if the first two people who hear the captain of the ship and see the ship, both of them run off the other direction? So I'm going to pause the video. Mr. Grummage barely glanced over his shoulder at the hastily departing worker. In exasperation, he said, "Miss Doyle, you will wait here for me." And with rapid strides, he took himself up the gangplank and onto the Seahawk, where he disappeared from my view. I stood my place, more than ever wanting to get aboard and meet the delightful children who would be my traveling companions. But as I waited on the dock for something like half an hour, all but unmoving in the waning of light of day, I could only gaze upon the ship. To say that I was unduly alarmed when I examined the Seahawk would be nonsense. I had not the remotest superstitious notions of what was to come. Nothing of the kind. No, the Seahawk was a ship, like countless others I had seen before, or for that matter have seen since. Oh, perhaps she was smaller and older than I anticipated, but nothing else. Moored to the dock, she rode the swell easily. Her standard rigging, tarred black for protection against the sea salt, rose above me, dark ladders to increasingly dark sky. And indeed, her royal yard seemed lost in the lowering night. So, if you see, right here, there's a little asterisk. I don't know if you can see that. Okay, there's a little tiny asterisk. That means that I have to look down below to read this description. And it says, "I shall of necessity use certain words during my account that might not be readily familiar, such as rigging, royal yard, or reefed. They were not words I knew when I first came to the ship, but rather terms I learned in the course of my voyage. Since many people today have no such knowledge, I have included a diagram of the Seahawk in the appendix at the end of this account. You may consult it from time to time so as to better understand what I refer to. The diagram will as well spare me unnecessary explanations and speed my narrative. Regarding the time aboard a ship, a fuller explanation may also be found in the appendix." So there's a picture of the ship. That's what she's getting onto. Her sails tied up, that is reefed, look like sleeves of new fallen snow on lofty trees. So right now, on your page, in the next box, I want you to draw a picture of what the Seahawk looks like. So I'm going to pause the video, and you can draw a quick picture. It doesn't have to be exact. Just do your best. I'm going to pause the video right here. Briefly, the Seahawk was what is known as a brig, a two-masted ship with a snowmast behind the main. Perhaps some 700 tons in weight, 107 feet stern to bow, 130 feet deck to mainmast cap. She was built perhaps in the late 18th or early 19th century. Her hull was painted black, her bulwarks white. These being the ordinary colors. Her two masts, raked slightly back, were square-rigged. She had a bowsprit, too, one that stood out from her bow like a unicorn's horn. So the bowsprit is the stick that stands at the front of the ship. Indeed, the one unique aspect of the ship was a carved figurehead of a pale white seahawk beneath the bowsprit. Its wings were thrust back against the bow, its head extended forward, beak wide open, red tongue protruding as if screaming. In the shadowy light that twisted and distorted its features, I was struck by the notion that this figure looked more like an angry bird avenging angel than a docile bird. So, I mean, this Seahawk on the front looks like this evil, like, avenging angel. So I guess it would be good, but an angel. The dockside was deserted and growing darker. I felt like taking myself up the gangplank in search of Mr. Grummage. But alas, my good manners prevailed. I remained where I was standing in a dreamlike state, thinking I know not what. But gradually, like a telescope being focused, I began to realize I was watching something clinging to one of the mooring ropes on the ship's stern. It reminded me of a picture I once had seen of a sloth, an animal that hangs upside down upon jungle vines, but this, I gradually perceived, was a man. He appeared to be shimmying himself from the dock up to the Seahawk. Even as I realized what I was seeing, he boarded the ship and was gone. I had no time to absorb that vision before I heard angry voices. Turning, I saw Mr. Grummage appear at the top gallant rail. So she sees this guy, like, climbing up this rope onto the ship. Does anything good come from someone sneaking onto a ship? I had no time to absorb that vision before I heard angry voices. Turning, I saw Mr. Grummage appear at the top gallant rail, engaged in an argument with someone I could not see. My gentleman repeatedly looked down at me, and so I thought gesticulated in my direction as if I were the subject of a heated discussion. So he's like pointing at her, like, and she can't hear what he's saying. At last, Mr. Grummage came down to the dock. As he drew near, I saw that his face was flushed with an angry eye that alarmed me. Is something amiss? I asked in a whisper. Not at all, he snapped. All is as planned. You have been expected. The ship's cargo is loaded. The captain is ready to sail. But, he trailed off, looking back at the ship, then turned again to me. It's just that you see, those two families, the ones you would be traveling with, your companions, they have not arrived. But they will, I said, trying to compose myself. That's not entirely certain, Mr. Grummage allowed. The second mate informs me that one family sent word that they could not reach Liverpool in time. The other family has a seriously ill child. There is concern that she should not be moved. Again, Mr. Grummage glanced over his shoulder at the Seahawk, as if, in some fashion, these events were the ship's fault. Turning back to me, he continued, As it stands, Captain Jaggery will accept no delay of departure. Quite proper. He has his orders. But Mr. Grummage, sir, I asked in dismay, what shall I do? Do, Miss Doyle? Your father left orders that you were to travel on this ship at this time. I have very specific written orders in that regard. He left no money to arrange otherwise. As for myself, he said, I'm off for Scotland tonight on pressing business. But surely, I cried, frustrated by the way Mr. Grummage was talking, as much as by his news, surely I mustn't travel alone. Miss Doyle, he returned, being upon a ship with the full complement of captain and crew would hardly be construed as traveling alone. But that would be all men, Mr. Grummage. And I am a girl. It would be wrong. I cried in absolute confidence that I was echoing the beliefs of my beloved parents. Mr. Grummage drew himself up. Miss Doyle, he said loftily, in my world, judgments as to rights and wrongs are left to my Creator, not to children. Now be so good as to board the Seahawk at once. Oh, he's talking down to her. He's kind of not a nice guy. So, you get a ship where two guys won't even go near the ship. These big sailor dudes don't want to go near the ship. Okay? He gets an argument with the guy on the ship. So right now, I want you to write one final comment. How are you feeling about this ship voyage? Write it down in the fourth box. All right? Get that finished up and get it turned into the tray.